Let's pray. God of all power, love, we thank you for giving us another day. Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. We ask your blessing on those who serve the people in this place. Many issues remain, and their solutions continue to challenge. As a nation, we need your guidance. During this session, help each member to respond to the tasks you have laid out for them. As Barbadians, renew our faith, strengthen our hope, enlighten our understanding, enlarge our charity, especially to those who are in need, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning to all. I wish to start by thanking all those persons who have worked above and beyond the call of duty for getting this location ready to continue the people's business. A lot of persons, there are a lot of unheralded heroes who would have worked at just about 3 days' notice to get this place ready, and they have done an exceptional job. And it goes to show what working together can achieve. I also wish to start by issuing a caveat to all honorable members. There will be no bell ringing in these chambers. So I expect and anticipate that if this session is to start at 10, that persons will be here on time to commence the people's business. A word to the wise is more than enough. Given that it's a new location, photography will be permitted, but only briefly.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker.
Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, February 18th, 2020, to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, Orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Speaker, I beg to move the suspension. I have to get used to this pressing. I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 12.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into standing committee of support.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into standing finance committee. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in standing finance committee.
Head 87, Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, in the amount of $320,144,028.
I now invite the Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's Southeast, to make her presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I
Her
beg
team.
your leave to invite members of the Ministry of Education to join me in the well.
So granted.
Madam Chair, let me first welcome you back to the House of Parliament. While it may not be the official house, I do want to take the opportunity to say that we have missed you and we welcome you in this place this morning.
Thank you.
I want to take the opportunity as well to also echo the sentiments of the Honourable Speaker in relation to thanking all those persons who have made the transition to this place possible and also practical this morning. I want to say to honourable members that I know that there will be teething issues over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours, but I do crave your indulgence in allowing us to meet all of the expectations of members over the course of the next few days and weeks. At the table, Madam Chair, is next to me on my left is Mrs. Joy Adamson, the Deputy Chief Education Officer, and also the Acting Chief. I also have on my right Betty Allen Headley, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education. Behind me is Trudy Farley, on the far right, the Financial Controller. Immediately behind me is the Parliamentary Secretary, Dr. Rommel Springer. Next to him is Dr. Roderick Rudder, who is the Chief Education Officer Deputy. Behind him is Mrs. Juanita Braffett-Wharton, the Senior Psychologist in the Student Support Services Department. Next to her is Mr. Francisco Miller, the Director of the Education Technical Management Unit Acting. Next to him is Junior Burgess, the Director of ITQA, the Information Technical Quality Assurance Unit. Behind Mr. Burgess is Henderson Thompson, the Director of the Barbados Vocational Training Board. Next to him is Janice Reed, the Senior Officer in Planning. And next to her is Mrs. Dawn Brown, Manager of the School Meals Department. I begin this morning, ma'am, in a different place than where I was a year ago when I spoke in this debate. In a place, ma'am, where I continue to be well pleased with this administration, given that just the whole purpose of us being able to meet within this estimates debate in this format, where not only ministers are asked to account for their conduct and their oversight of their ministries, but also that the opportunity has been afforded to civil servants as well to join them in discussions about the respective ministries. I think that that initiative, which started last year and which continues this year, is one certainly that must have the commendation of all, as we came to office promising that we would ensure that there was greater accountability and transparency, certainly in the issues of relating to governance. Since the Ministry of Education in the last year that I've been minister, we have had a number of changes in terms of its hierarchy. The Permanent Secretary is new to the Ministry of Education, and we have had the departure of the then Chief Education Officer. There have been changes across the system as well, which in our attempt to ensure that we prepare the educational system for the transformation that is upon us, that we have to ensure that we move with the times as we're asking others to do the same as well. Education has always been and continues to be one of the major priorities for this administration. And at present, we are spending around 11% of our total expenditure on education, which equates to around 5% of GDP. We were so serious on coming to office, ma'am, that we took the opportunity to restore tuition fees to students who had been deprived of this privilege under the last administration, when tuition fees were withdrawn from students who were pursuing studies at the University of the West Indies from 2014-2015 academic year. I am pleased to announce to you that we have been able to launch the component of the Give Back policy, which has seen all of our students across the tertiary institutions, Urdeston, BCC, and the University of the West Indies, participating in registering for the various programs and starting to register with the various volunteer entities to ensure that while we pay as a government for their education, that they are equally appreciative of the fact that government is prepared to make an investment in their education. I am pleased to also say that students have started to register, and we hope that a full rollout will take place in time for the next academic term. Equally important to this administration, while we sought to repair some of the damage that took place over the course of the last decade, was also a focus on reforming and transforming the educational system. We recognize, ma'am, that the system that we have inherited is by no means perfect. And there are some that will say that the system has served them well, but there are others whom we have come to recognize have felt disengaged in the educational system. There are some for whom they see the whole educational system through a different lens, and I believe that all of the members of this administration are certainly focused on ensuring that we tap into the true potential of all citizens and that no child in particular is left behind. The fact that our system was born out of the bowels of an enslaved society and a colonial society where access to education really was in the hands of a privileged few, and that in the early stages of the colonial period, that there were certain schools that were constructed for the purpose of education, and that only a certain handful of persons, particularly males, had the opportunity to attend, has been a trend that obviously continued even well after post that emancipation period, and certainly has led us to hold on to a legacy of slavery, which I believe all of us now agree needs to be dismantled. Back then, there were limited places, and persons fought to be able to get into those schools, and it was a competitive environment. We then saw, with the course of time, the number of places being increased, and we have still retained what is known for many as the common entrance exam, the 11+. This administration, and certainly the Prime Minister, has repeatedly indicated to the country that the abolition of the 11+ examination will happen under this administration. And I have been given responsibility for ensuring, ma'am, that that process not only starts, but that we see the process through to completion. We have recognized that at many of our institutions, students feel as though, in many cases when they hit 10, 11, that their future has already been predetermined. And we are seeing a significant fallout where students, when they go into secondary school, are exiting school without the relevant qualifications. It is an area, ma'am, that I don't think that any of us can continue to ignore. There's a famous quote that it's almost a case of chickens coming home to roost. And I think a lot of what we are seeing across our society in terms of the fallout of crime and the number of socio-economic issues confronting the society all make their way back to a very frustrated student population, which emerges into an adult population unable to have the requisite skills to be employed and to also be employers themselves. With that in mind, we recognize that technology and the emerging technologies will drive the transformation of education in this country. Barbados has been traditionally known for being a leader in education. We may have had much criticism over the course of the last decade in relation to where we stood in that respect, but I do feel that our feet are firmly planted in making that transformation and making the hard decisions that are necessary to bring about that transformation. At the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute, ma'am, at present, students are engaged in things like drone technology and maintenance, hybrid and electric-powered vehicles, fiber optics, computer numerical control, smart agriculture, garment technology, and things like 3D printing. We have recognized that if we are to seize the opportunities in the global community, that we have to ensure that our citizens, certainly, and our students are equipped with the tools to be able to not just give back to Barbados and the region, but certainly to be able to go anywhere in the world to be able to work. And it is with that in mind, ma'am, that I am very proud to announce this morning that this administration, being so committed to emerging technologies and wanting to place Barbados ahead of the game yet again, has decided to invest in robotics, and not just what I came to office and found, the odd summer camp taking place across the country, or even I last year was able to grant permission to a number of persons to use our schools to be able to do robotic camps. Not in a small scale, ma'am, but to be able to take this to an entirely different level, where we are prepared to invest this year the sum of $5.651 million in not only robotics equipment, but ensuring that robotics is placed across all of our secondary schools. We introduced the pilot in the nursery schools and also in some of the primary schools. We will also be capturing the attention of students at the special schools, and the intention is to also roll out robotics clubs across all of the secondary institutions as well. Devices will be provided for students as well as teachers, and we have a very rigorous program designed to engage teachers in training and retraining, because we do have some existing in the system presently who can teach the program, but we want to be able to give as many options to our young people in the current climate to explore as much as possible the area of robotics and new technologies. We spend significant sums on an annual basis on our scholarship and our exhibition winners. What is often interesting for me is that we have a number of persons who are successful in the science subjects. And I think rather than us continuing to export persons outside, we also have to look at how we create the climate for them from now to want to go overseas and come back to Barbados to give back to this little rock. As a consequence, ma'am, the 2.2 of the 5.6 million, which will be allocated to the robotics program, which will start in September, and for which training will begin in the coming weeks. We have also sought to ensure that we spend equally on ensuring that there is Wi-Fi connectivity across our schools. Now, in recent weeks, I know there was some concern about whether we were able to meet the demand across the schools, because it is one thing to have technology, and we've been very good as a country in terms of receiving assistance from other territories, but oftentimes we have not been equally good at making sure that that technology is put to good use. And so we have had donations from the People's Republic of China in relation to desktop computers and laptops. But we have also found that in many cases, those devices on coming to office had not been fully deployed. And one of the major reasons was because we had not done the cabling and the Wi-Fi connectivity across the various campuses of the school plants to ensure that teachers and students were able to connect on the devices. We, however, take this very seriously. We've already started to ensure that the access points that were necessary across the school plants for the existing devices, that those were deployed. We have installed a number of them across the plants, and the success rate is improving daily. We have also, in this estimate, allocated $370,550 for cabling, which will first focus on our secondary schools and then on primary and nursery. Let me add here, ma'am, that as we move towards a system under the CXC program where we are moving towards e-testing, it becomes more and more critical for us to improve the connectivity in our schools, as well as to ensure that students have the relevant devices to be able to practice on. And a number of those pilot projects are on stream at the moment to be able to allow our fourth and fifth formers, certainly who are preparing for the CXC exams, to have the necessary equipment in place. So I believe this will go in a major way to being able to allow us to not only have our students conform to using these devices in a positive way, but certainly being able to put them ahead of the relevant technology as well. And in relation to our e-testing, we have a mandate to conform in terms of the introduction of devices by 2025. I am assured that as monies permit and finances permit, that the intention is that we will continue to see the further introduction of additional devices across the system. But this is a start, ma'am, and it is a welcome start for this Ministry of Education. We have also looked at alliances with the People's Republic of China in relation to training our teachers in the flipped classroom management practices. And we have a delegation that will go off later this year because, again, no system is going to be effective if we do not continue to train. And therefore, given all that we have spent on education over the years, it is not about just what is taught at Earlston, but we have to continue to have the educational programs continuing to equip our teachers in the classroom to find different learning strategies and teaching strategies for our students. There was an initiative that was started a few months ago called Pro Futuro Digital Mobile Classroom. And again, this is another feature that has been introduced into the classroom to allow students and teachers to basically focus on competencies and methods of learning through digital technology. We've started the first set of training, which was done in change management. We will do another set in March again, and the devices will actually be in the hands of students in September of this year. We have started with 17 primary schools, and 30 tablets will be deployed at each school for the Class 1 and Class 2. Let me just add that this program is free of cost to Barbados, and it is intended to span a period of some 5 years. This ministry, again, committed to ensuring that we prepare our Thank you, ma'am. To prepare our young people for transformation, has been investing in pilot projects relating to e-books. We've also been encouraging our teachers as well to utilize all of the available technologies through Open EMIS, as well as the G Suite for Education, which allows greater connectivity between teachers and students. Ma'am, I wanted to give you that perspective in terms of how we are using within the ministry technology to be able to ensure that all persons have equal access to education. Whether you're visually impaired, hearing impaired, we believe that technology placed in the hands of our student population will help to drive the process of the transformation. Our emphasis is equally on improving our plans to ensure that certainly technical and vocational skills are at the core of everything that we do. We recognize that persons are not only academic, but they're also involved in technical and vocational skills as well as the creative. So our move towards STEAM education, focusing on the science, the technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics is a major pillar of this ministry moving forward. Having said all that, ma'am, I would want to just say that many of these things that we have ahead of us are threatened by a number of issues which I will certainly get into later in this debate, but specifically to say that we have had a number of issues in education in the last few weeks. And I started this morning by speaking to the good things and the positive things that are happening in education, because oftentimes you can get bogged down in the negative things, the violence in schools, you can get bogged down into the socio-economic issues that are plaguing us in the system, and sometimes we don't prepare for what happens when we find solutions to those problems. And I wanted to just start on a positive note to give hope to certainly the student population and to the teachers that this ministry, while we are addressing the issues of violence in schools and while we are addressing the issues of infrastructure in the schools, and in these estimates we have sought to address both of them, that we equally intend to be the driving force in education to help to transform the Barbadian economy with the adequate resources in our educational system.
Can you move it to stand part?
I beg to move, ma'am, that head 87 do now stand part.
Okay. Thank you. Just to remind members, because it has been a whole year, you are allowed 3 minutes to ask questions or comment with 3 supplementary questions. I'm reminding the members, the persons in the well, to please introduce yourself as you get up to speak to answer questions or comment. You may go from here. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
hold on.
I do seem to recall that the opposition is allowed.
That's 10 minutes, my fault.
I do seem to recall the opposition is allowed to respond to the opening presentation by the
Very
minister.
correct.
Let me
Honourable
begin
member
there.
for the opposition.
Yes, let me begin therefore by lending my voice to that chorus of welcome for you back to duty, and of course, a commendation to those who have worked so hard to provide for this facility so this exercise can be held here today. The first page of the estimates for this ministry, Madam Chair, outlines 5 or 6 strategic objectives for the ministry in the year ahead, and I'm sure beyond that. I read them, reflected on them fairly carefully, and I derived the sense that they don't seem to fully reflect that the ministry has a grasp, and if it does have that grasp is not reflected in the strategic objectives outlined, and a grasp of the critical issues around education in Barbados today. And hence, one could easily walk away if one did not read too much further beyond that there's not a signal here of an intention to robustly and urgently address some of these issues. A couple I'd like to raise, Madam Chair. The spread of deviance in the school system in Barbados today, and I think the Honourable Minister just alluded to that briefly and indicated she would come back to some of that. But what is the intention of the ministry and the plan with respect to addressing deviance in the school system, and beyond that, to the extent that the Ministry of Education can be involved, the spread of violence in the close precincts of our school in Barbados today? What is beyond deviance, the clear plan to address the seeming sense of disillusionment among many of our student school leavers, secondary level, tertiary level, who seem to have come to a place where they're very negative in terms of their outlook, the chances of finding career and job opportunities in Barbados today. Barbados is faced with some economic constraints. We understand the level of employment that now is current. But I have repeatedly said beyond the level of unemployment, there is what I call the scourge of underemployment in Barbados. And certainly that is something with which the ministry would have to be significantly concerned. This country invests, and these estimates would confirm it, a lot of millions of dollars every year in the process of education. And we are producing out of our institutions good products. But beyond producing those good products out of the system, the context in which they find themselves thereafter is not such that lends to great optimism with respect to job opportunity and career opportunity. And I would want to think that this is one of the things with which we would concern ourselves as we talk here over the next period with respect to the intentions of this ministry. Madam Chair, there are enough challenges in the school system as it is right now, as it stands right now. But what seems to have been emerging recently is a growing tension between the administration from the ministry level and the teaching body in Barbados. And there have been many public spats between the Ministry of Education and the teachers' unions. We can ill afford that, and I do not offer this as a criticism to the management of the Honourable Minister. It is just that it is a reality that it has emerged in these times. And with all the other challenges that we have, we really cannot afford adding that to the mix. Now, I may not understand, Mr. Speaker, there's something called a comprehensive gender sexuality education in some student models which have been developed. And these models, in fact, are applied in teaching elsewhere, ages 3 to 5. I have not been advised that it is happening in Barbados. I really would like to raise it as a query as to whether or not it is happening, or whether or not it's the intention of the ministry to introduce these kind of modules in our curriculum. I'm concerned as to not so much the subject matter itself in the school system, but the age at which it is being applied in the school system. There are a couple of other issues. I suppose when we get into the figures themselves, I didn't see any mention of the student revolving loan fund. There may be something I've missed or forgotten with reference to that. and the whole matter of the National Development Scholarships as well, which was seen as a very critical thing for persons who wanted to further their career in matters pertinent to our developmental thrust. These are some of the issues of concern. I'm not going to take any more time. I do want to advise you, Madam Chair, I have about a dozen questions for my honourable friend and her support team today, and I hope they get the opportunity to raise them as we go on. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last year, honourable member has taught me that we cannot continue to be reactionary. Every time there is a tragedy, people react and sometimes want to ignore the root cause of the problem. As an administration, we have recognized that oftentimes when students are acting out, there's usually an underlying reason for their behavior. Whether it is economic reasons in terms of things transition in the household, whether there are social issues in the environment from which they come, whether there are behavioral and learning challenges that students may have. All of the studies that we have done point to a number of factors that contribute to this whole issue of deviant behavior. Where we must be now prepared to dialogue a bit more is in relation to the types of interventions that have now become necessary. We can no longer simply suspend a child, defer a child because the child is not meeting the academic requirements. We can no longer suspend them and send them to Edna Nichols for 10 days for them to return into the system only to repeat again without the relevant follow-through. So rather than constantly responding to the issues, what we have sought to do is to look at closing the gaps where there are gaps to be closed, because we recognize that a lack of follow-through in relation to the manifestation of problems in the system really has been our biggest problem. We have a number of support agencies, whether it is through the probation department, the Edna Nichols facility, whether you go to New Horizon. It doesn't matter the amount of entities that exist. Where we have fallen down consistently is being able to pick up the file and recognize where children have fallen down and being able to look behind it. And I'm pleased that this administration has, through the Prime Minister and certainly the ministry, the member for St. Thomas's ministry, started to look at vulnerable households. In a number of cases, identifying those students who are creating a challenge for the system has led us to the same types of households which we would classify as vulnerable. And in those households, we've recognized that we're going to have to assist not just in the issue that has manifested itself, but we're going to have to look beyond the issues and delve into what is happening with the parents, what is happening with the other siblings, because you may see a problem arising in one school with one child, but when you dig deeper, when you do the investigation, you recognize that the child has siblings, and at other schools, those students are also creating challenges in the system. So we have taken an approach in the ministry with the member for St. Thomas's ministry, where we have started to share information in relation to our students. And this came out of the consultation that we held last year, where we wanted to not just put a plaster on the sore, but we wanted to dig a little deeper to be able to address a lot of the underlying causes of the problems. And through the team of social workers, we've been able to utilize private social workers. We've been able to work with the team at the Ministry of Welfare and Family. We have been able to identify a number of those children and be able to make recommendations into the type of provisions that may need to be made for them and in relation to their households. So you will not see specifics in terms of the narrative through the numbers, but I give you the assurance, Honourable Member, that we have dug a bit deeper in terms of what are the root causes of deviance to be able to try to address the problems. There are a number of students we have even referred into, whether it was skills training through our ministry, as well as into the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. We have tried to work with the Ministry of Youth as well to identify programs of interest for these students, because our reality has been that many of the students have been tuned out of the educational system as well, because it has not been there to engage them. And that is why we are trying to expand the curriculum now to be able to capture the attention of these kids. Because if it is hard at home, we have a responsibility to make sure that it is not hard at school. And therefore, our corrective measures really have to start with a revision of our curriculum to make it more relevant. Many of these kids are very good with their hands. Many of these kids are very good with their creative side. And you will see in estimates, particularly with the schedule that speaks to the secondary schools, a number of the entities we have placed monies in the vote to enable musical equipment to be purchased. It's not by chance. We have a lot of good, talented young people in our system. But if we are to get serious about the creative industries, we have to start with the basic tools in the system that every school can have, and every student can have the opportunity to be part of a choir, to be part of playing an instrument, to be part of a system where they don't have to wait until after they leave school to exploit and fully explore their true potential.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And first, I would like to join other members in commending the staff for making these particular accommodations as comfortable as they can, and noting the difficult situation, obviously, that they would have gone into to make it habitable for us. And I want to echo the sentiment of all those and thank them for all the work that they have done. In particular, I want to ask a question, and it won't be a statement like the leader of the opposition did, as merely a statement and bring his questions later, but I will go straight to the question, and it is this. Clearly, you are stating that the 11 plus will be coming to an end, but what I would like to know is do you have an idea of what you will be replacing it by? I thought that it would either be school-based assessment or zoning or both, a combination of both. Does your ministry have an idea going forward, even now? I know it's maybe early days, what you would be looking to replace the allotment of students to various schools with?
Thank you, Member. A few issues have arisen in the process of our transition. And one of those things is obviously we have to look at various systems that have been working well to be able to make a determination what will work well for Barbados. Because I have read paper after paper making recommendations about the abolition of the 11 plus. But in terms of moving to the next phase, people remain very uncomfortable when you start to talk of the abolition of this particular exam. The biggest question is, when you replace it, what do you replace it with? And I believe that we are bright enough as a society to recognize when something is not working, but I also believe we are bright enough to recognize when there are other systems that might also allow us to draw from them to be able to create something that works for Barbados as well. One of the things that we've looked at is the whole concept of middle schools and high schools. We've drawn on a number of the international countries as well as in the region, the best practices in all of those regions. A few weeks ago, I established an advisory education committee to be able to delve into not just the whole issue of reform in relation to the 11 plus, but to dig deeper into whether our system is working for us in terms of teacher training and evaluation, continuing education, tertiary education. What is it that we need to now project in terms of the type of educational system that we want to see? And a large part of that transition obviously starts with the 11 plus examination, whether a decision will be made in terms of extending the age for primary so that you will extend it for a longer period. Those are all considerations that we're making. The intention is that as we continue to consult, and I intend to go to the public from March after these estimates, so that we can start the conversation with the public regarding the type of model that works best. I think we are generally agreed that there needs to be some changes, and that's why I said that while we are working through the fine-tuning of the details of the system, it is important that we still continue to change the way in which our curriculum unfolds. So things like the robotics, things like the creative arts, making those things more mainstream, because they will form a large part of a revamped curriculum as well. We have also started to assess a number of our secondary schools, because in this transition, secondary schools are going to be in a sense, the place where our students will have to go in a middle school environment. And in so doing, many of our schools have already had large investments made into their plant, but in some cases they need to be improved if they are going to be deemed as specialist schools. So we have started to engage with the principals, the chairman of the boards, in relation to the academic performance of the students presently. Where are the deficits? Where are also the interests that students have, so that we can start with the existing evidence to shape a school plan in a way that best suits its existing focus. So many of the schools have identified areas already. Obviously, there are schools that you will see in the estimates have focused on things like agriculture, because they're in the country areas in most cases. They have large tracts of land that is ready for development. So we can move towards agricultural programs in those areas. Schools where there may be a large interest in the arts, we can then focus on that side in terms of the creative arts and creating schools of excellence in the arts as well. And so that is the approach that we're taking, because it's not a turnkey operation where you can say today we remove the 11+ and tomorrow we have a new system in place. I think ideally, one of the recommendations that has been coming forward so far in relation to this zoning is that children should children should be attending school closer to where they live. You, Minister, have had to deal with the issue of calls from me, certainly, complaining about my students not being able to get to school. One of the biggest solutions for that would be to ensure that students go closer to where they live. But let us explore our realities. Many of the schools presently have not had the investment in the improvements in the plan for several years. So we still have, as we make the transition, to look obviously at building out the existing plant to make sure that we can move towards the specialist schools, but that we have the capacity to meet the demands of the student population as well. So it is a consideration that we are making, but as I said, I want the input of the wider Barbados, because this is not a decision for me as minister or the leader of the party or any of us as ministers alone to make. This is something which obviously the entire population needs to weigh into as well. One of the good things so far is that we have a number of people from Barbados who are educators across the world, who have been reaching out and offering support for this transition. They're excited because they have come through the educational system in Barbados, but they, like many of us, understand the deficiencies. And they have been part of models of education that they have seen working, particularly the middle schools and the high schools, and they have a voice in terms of helping us to shape the type of policy that will come to the stream. So I do look forward to engaging that conversation. We are hoping that this will be the last cohort of students that will participate in the 11+ examination. And if that is the case, then as I said, once we start in March, it is intended that we will spend a few months in discussion with the entire country and be able to formulate a program going forward for implementation for 2021 or 2022.
Thank you, Minister, for that excellent response. And clearly, you've put a lot of thought into it. I must tell you, my experience with my daughter in Canada was the specialized schools. And they have a very in-depth system for specialization. But what was important and what I realized was interesting there, and why I like the system, is it was not rigid. Because for each child, it cannot be that you must go to the nearest school. But the flexibility that was built in to give the child the best opportunities that it can access at the time was something that I thought was important. And I think to not have that rigidity for children, especially with the education, because children learn at different rates, children's exposures are different and their experiences are different. And I thought that that was the best part of the system, but I thank you for your response.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we're very happy to have you back and our new surroundings here. I know it will take some time to settle, but we will do well. I really want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast for her presentation. And I was very heartened to hear what we are seeking to do in relation to engaging our children more with more appropriate ways of teaching them, using the things that are of interest, whether it's robotics, the technology, etc. But of even greater importance to me was the issue of how you're going to support teachers in helping them to transition into being able to deliver the type of training that our children will need so that we engage them more. So I appreciated the efforts at teacher training, classroom management, those things, because so many teachers are in despair in managing their classes. Now, the area that I wanted to get a little more on was in the schools, we have guidance counselors. And obviously, one guidance counselor in a school with 200, 300 children is a lot, and they can be overwhelmed, especially as we're trying to deal with the issue of violence and challenges with children and families and so on. Are there any other efforts that will be put in place to give support to supplement this effort so that we can give our children a total support system that can help us develop them and make them the best they can be?
Thank you, Honourable Member. First of all, I want to touch back on the first point you made on training for teachers. We have spent a lot of time in the last year looking at an area which is becoming commonly known as emotional intelligence, being able to allow teachers to benefit from that type of training, because we recognize that it is very difficult for many of them to cope in a classroom where there are several children in the environment who are suffering with ADHD, they have Asperger's, they're somewhere on the spectrum. And when you place that many children in a classroom environment, it places pressure on the teaching community to be able to cope. Now, when we came to office, we had looked at introducing guidance counselors into certainly our secondary schools, and we had identified 7 schools that we would start the process of introduction. In the course of the last year, I must tell you that we had to revisit the approach to be taken, simply because I don't think it is any mystery to members or to the public that the Ministry of Education has had to deal with immense tragedy in our schools and with our student population. It has therefore forced us to dig a little deeper in terms of our response mechanisms. And so when we started out thinking about guidance counselors and adding just that additional support for the existing guidance counselor, who really is managing not 200 or 300, but in some cases 800 or 900 students on the roll. And out of that number, you are having sometimes 20, 30% of students having to face the guidance counselor at some point for some type of intervention. We therefore looked, particularly after we saw the events unfold at Frederick Smith, we looked at a revisit of the title of guidance counselor, and it was a move that we had some discussion with the Guidance Counselor Association as well about, to move towards retitling the new position that would go into the schools as a school counselor, because we saw that while the existing guidance counselors were swamped and they needed the additional support, we also recognized that you needed to have an additional person who could focus on assessments, who could focus on home visits a bit more, and that could share the workload in a different way, but also would be able to help to capture information that the Student Support Services Department within the ministry, particularly through the senior psychologists, would then be able to have a database that identifies the challenges across the system. So no more would it be a simple case of waiting until something happens to identify that a child was exhibiting symptoms from primary school and then entered secondary school, and we wait till that headline hits us in the paper, but rather that we are proactive in identifying through these support systems now a whole school approach to interventions, which did not exist before. We are trying to break down what they call the silos, trying to break down the miscommunication, where some people may not quite appreciate that the sharing of information is critical to being able to get to the root cause of the problem. And we've been working assiduously to try to deal with that. So the new position that is envisaged will be one where persons will work from the ministry and through the ministry, but be stationed at the schools, but work very closely with the guidance counselor existing, as well as the principal, as well as the student support department, as well as all those support persons who come into institutions like Supreme Counseling and all the other entities that go onto the premises to work with children that may have challenges. So we have focused on building out the support services team beyond the Ministry of Education, but looking at all of the additional support personnel who can be involved in the system in helping us, but mainly to be able to capture data. Because there's no point inviting an entity to come into the school to talk to children, and when they unravel behavioral problems, that we are not able as a ministry to know what interventions may be necessary. Mentoring is fine. Talking to a student is fine, but oftentimes there are some deep-rooted issues that as a ministry we need to be able to provide that support and that counseling immediately to help to address. And so we have been trying to, again, close the gaps so that we are not operating independent of each other, but rather that we're working together. There will also be the safety officers and the social workers as well that will be deployed. We have had to obviously go back to re-advertising the post of school counselor, but we had a number of applications that came in, so I am anticipating that by the end of this semester, certainly that we will have for the new semester, the institution of all of these positions having been deployed across the entire system.
Thank you so much for that. I am very heartened by the fact that we are doing that strengthening at the level of the guidance counselor. And you mentioned just now, when I mentioned schools with 300, you said schools with 600 and 800. Now that must be a mammoth task for any principal, any head teacher to be able to cope with a school population of that size. I think you also mentioned earlier in your presentation that you're doing work in terms of the physical structure and facilities and so on. Because if the environment doesn't look right and feel right, it is depressing for both children and teachers. What is being done? Are there any plans for helping the principals in the general management of the school so that they can focus more on supporting their teachers and managing the children in the school setting?
Yeah, that's one of the concerns that has been raised by the principals in terms of the ability to cope. You know, it's like running a household. Some people may be able to run a household with 1 or 2 people, but when you place 10 people in a household, it becomes problematic. And we're dealing with human beings, and at the end of the day, I think we have recognized that not all persons are able to cope with large school roles. We had a situation a couple years ago where the last administration closed, for instance, the Alma Parish School. And what we actually saw when we look at the statistics is that the number of students who were underperforming in the common entrance exam were being shuttled into some other institutions and not receiving the adequate support systems that were necessary. What we needed really was to have a leveling of the school roles, where no school really should go to the level of a 900. So if you take certain of the schools right now, that is I think there's one that's actually at 1100. So you have a situation where that balance has not been properly monitored, and as a consequence, it makes it hard for the principals to engage in educational leadership in its true sense, because they're spending so much time dealing with a lot of the behavioral issues and the conflict resolution issues that they have to undertake in order to address the learning issues within the institution. Now, in terms of engagement with our teachers, we have gone this step further to engage really the Urdeston Teachers Training College, because I believe as the premier institution in Barbados for teaching, they have a significant role to play in getting it right, in helping our teachers to make the transition from academics to practical. I remember last year, one of our biggest debates was in terms of the percentage of practical training that many teachers engaged in on their program of study. Because I have a view that you are spending more time in the classroom, and therefore you need to be adequately prepared and observed in the classroom more than anything, because that is where your skill set really must come out. And so we've asked them to look at tailoring their curriculum and the delivery of instruction in short courses, in longer courses, in medium-sized courses, to be able to allow teachers to come in, take advantage of the courses, and be able to go back into the classroom. Of course, as we move towards continuing education development, it will be obviously a requirement for teachers to participate in this area even more than they do now. But I have found that teachers have been generally receptive to the ongoing professional training. We have started with the Maria Holder Trust in particular recently, some additional programs to help deal with special needs education, because again, I feel that more and more our teachers need to have that as the norm rather than the exception. And so we have been working with the Maria Holder Trust and the ministry staff and Urdiston to roll out programs to allow mass-based training in sensitization for the teachers to be able to cope. Where we have had some challenges at specific schools, we have sent in teams of counselors as well to talk with our teachers, because it's not just the students that need conversation and counseling, but we have found that we often neglect the teachers and their emotional well-being in the process, because day after day they have not been able to cope. And just to go back to what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition indicated earlier, yes, there has been a feeling in the past that the teaching profession was not valued, that the view of the unions were not valued. And I've tried my utmost best to ensure that they understand that we do respect them in the Ministry of Education. We have engaged them at the table in dialogue. They are part of the discussions that will be coming up in relation to the number of reforms, because we're not going to do reforms without engagement with the unions. But the reality is we have to put structures in place, because a number of structures have broken down. And before we can start to engage in serious dialogue, we have to fix our house first. So we've been spending time trying to fix the issues within the ministry, to be able to put those committees in place for these, to be able to start those discussions with all of the various stakeholders. But we continue to engage with them to find solutions in the schools to the problems that they are experiencing on the front line as well.
Just to add something or to ask a question, you spoke about the guidance counselors. I heard you mention secondary schools. Where are we with respect to the primary schools? Because I think we all recognize that a lot of the problems, you have a psychologist on board, a lot of the problems originate even before they hit secondary. What's happening with the primary schools in that light?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a number of persons privately that we deploy, private psychologists, through the assistance of the Sandy Lane Trust. They have provided the assistance. You will not see that in the estimates per se, but these are people who recognize, particularly in a time when the last administration certainly didn't have the resources to do it and didn't direct the resources there, that these resources were necessary to do the psychological evaluations and the social interventions that were necessary. So we have continued with that program to ensure that we can have at the primary level a team of social workers and psychologists going into the system to test and to evaluate the students. Do we need more? Of course we need more. But the good thing is that by bringing the role of school counselor under the Ministry of Education and reporting directly to the senior psychologist, it now gives us an opportunity not only to focus on secondary schools, but also to assist in deploying into the primary schools as well as the need arises. Because it is really the hope that with the additional resources that we see a diminution of the problems in the system. And once we can get to a leveling off, we can spread those persons into other institutions to help with the problems or the challenges that other schools may also be having.
Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions to the Honourable Minister is in relation to sub-program 7100, page 329, and sub-program 20283, as it relates to grants for non-profit organizations. Now, there is a move to resuscitate a number of NGOs and CBOs, and I'm wondering what is the process of sourcing funding under these sub-programs.
You're speaking specifically to NGOs supporting the ministries, the support systems in the Ministry of Education. I'm not clear what you're asking exactly.
Grants for non-profit organizations. So I'm just trying to be clear as to what exactly this money is used for and how can NGOs and CBOs source funds under this sub-program.
Just to give you the breakdown in terms of the entities that are actually covered and the resources that are available. Presently, the Barbados Association of Reading has been one of the entities that has received funds, the National Council for Parent Teachers Association, the Barbados Union of Teachers Athletic Meet, and the National Association of Primary School Athletic Knapsack, right, that is correct. So those are really the entities that are referred to in that sub-program. What I think you are asking is whether other entities in terms of support organizations wanting to assist the ministry would be entitled to a subvention. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, because, okay, sub-program 0283, Children at Risk. I'm thinking that those community-based organizations can assist in terms of running programs at community centers and within the communities. So I was just wondering if any of that funding can be made available if the requisite proposal is submitted to the Ministry of Education.
All right, I want to clarify for you. Children at Risk, Program 283, is actually relating to the Ed Nichols Center. So that is where the funds are actually allocated when it says the grants to nonprofit organizations. Any institution can offer to provide support to the Ministry of Education through the Student Support Services Department. As I said before, we have gone to great lengths to try to make the request to assist in education as seamless as possible, but at the same time, I think everyone would appreciate that we cannot just unleash all sorts of people into the educational system. So there still has to be guidelines. There still has to be the feedback of information coming into the system. The monies that are already budgeted are obviously for specific purposes. So the answer to, I think, what you're asking me is whether there are more funds available for other groups who may want to come on board to assist. And I would have to say that as presently presented, there is no additional funding to fund those particular projects. However, if they are willing to partner with the ministry and to work within the framework set out by the Student Support Services Department, we are more than willing to give consideration to the application. Because there are churches that have been helping us, other NGOs that have been helping us, but as we said before, we need to be in a position where we don't just go in and talk to students, but where you find information that could be useful to us to do further intervention, there needs to be an understanding of confidentiality, but a sharing of information to help us to get the resources to those students, okay? And we appreciate that students don't always want to tell the structured persons what is going on in their lives. So we know that through some of these support organizations and community groups, sometimes they are often able to draw out information that our professionals sometimes cannot draw out readily. And there is a place for them. But what we must caution is that there still has to be guidelines set by the Ministry of Education. It's not a free-for-all, because sometimes you can also do more harm than good in going in to try to do an intervention with these students as well. So we just err on the side of caution. We are totally supportive of retired persons coming on board and groups of young professionals and the social workers coming on board to assist the ministry. But we also ask you to just give us a call, let us know what it is that you want to do. Let us look at the program, let us see if it is meeting the need that we actually have identified, and you will have our blessing in being able to provide those support services.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me also say good morning to all distinguished members and to thank the Honourable Minister of Education for her explicit way of putting over these facts, as well as to welcome her back in new spirits and new health to be able to take this ministry forward. It is one of the most critical ministries in this country, as all of us are aware. My first query is to make reference to what is happening to some of our children, acknowledging that our children come from homes, communities that are really very troubled. And we cannot keep going back on the past where, yes, it takes a whole village to raise a child, but a lot of villages are not as cohesive as the past. and we have all become very internal in ourselves, in looking after our own and forgetting the neighbor's children and so on. And I want to indicate then that as a result of that, both our teachers and our children and others associated with the development of humankind are coming from these same troubled communities. I want to find out from the Honourable Minister in relation to the use of the technology in the school beyond, because we were told that cell phones, children could have them, but we are seeing now a lot of negativity when we know that those cellular phones can be infused in the whole technological aspect of things to make a difference. And those aspects are confusing us, even though we know, yes, we're in a changing world and parents need to have their children make contact with them in case there are challenges, can't get home, whatever. I want to find out from the Honourable Minister, ma'am, what is the status of a consultancy that was done by the Ministry of Education for more than 5 consecutive years in the past administration, and if the information is available to help us to be able to get a better understanding as to what is happening to our children or what has happened to our children in school, and the recommendations from the findings that we would be able to start to investigate, because we recognize that the deviancy is across the entire country, indeed the world. And I would want to know, if they are available, how is the ministry going to help persons like those social workers in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs and others to be able to start to look at it, because the deviance is not only as a result of the children, but of course the parents have given up because they have not been able to learn how to handle these children when the signs are being manifested. I would like to know what is the status, if that report has been laid, how could it be accessible to the Parliament of Barbados and the rest of us, so that working together we can come up with more solutions to be able to tackle those issues.
Honourable Member, I only know of one consultancy in the Ministry of Education which related to violence in schools.
Children, yeah.
I only know of one consultancy that attracted the sum of $7,500 per month in fees to a particular individual whose reports were only shared with the then Minister of Education. Honourable Member, I am aware that on coming to office, I terminated that contract. I spoke with the Student Support Services Department to inquire whether they had been privy to any of that information, which perhaps could have informed and averted a lot of what we see happening in the system today. And regrettably, the last administration did not see it prudent to share with the very critical Student Support Services Department that information, or indeed to take any of the necessary strategies that would be necessary to address the issues of violence in school. And that person was paid, ma'am, for about 7 years straight, $7,500 per month. All I will say is that those funds no doubt could have helped us to pay for additional psychologists in the Ministry of Education. It could have helped with social work services. It could have helped us tremendously to address and to give support to a number of the persons in the teaching profession. So I hope that answers your question. We have sought through the interventions that we have done recently to gather our own information in relation to the challenges in the schools. We have sought to work with the support agencies, Supreme Counseling and others, to provide us with the necessary information upon which we can form our own assessment of the situation, and to be able to provide the necessary interventions. And as I said, those are the things that led us to be able to take immediate action in changing the name of guidance counselor to school counselor, and being able to fine-tune the role of the safety officers and the additional social workers in the schools. Again, this is not an administration that is going to wait until things happen. But while things are happening, we are trying to put things in place to address it. On your other question of technology, it is not so much the technology as it is what we do with the technology. And I'm a firm believer that once we are able to convey to our students the appropriate use of technology, that is half of the battle that has been won. I had an incident recently where, regrettably, one of our teachers took to using the technology to vent online. I have had situations where even, members of the union sometimes seek to raise questions that perhaps could be addressed with the ministry via social media. We have to stop using social media in a negative way. And as leaders, we have to start by being leaders to our students. If we have concerns, there is a legitimate way to raise those concerns, and those concerns will be addressed once they're raised. But we also have to signal as a society that we will not be critical of students for using technology inappropriately. And then at the same time, the persons who are vested in positions of leadership equally use the technology in a negative way. It cannot be one rule for one and one rule for the next. I remember when I was in the other halls of Parliament, drawing attention to the way in which parliamentary debate had unfolded, where persons were shouting across, the then government was shouting across at the opposition, and remarking that as a House of Parliament, we had a responsibility to be leaders in the way we conducted ourselves. Because as children listening, they obviously took a view that this place was becoming rowdy. And I still hold that view, that there is a way to express yourselves, and you have to do it the correct way, because the children are watching how we communicate and how we use the social media to vent, whether parents or teachers or unions or ministry officials. The rule applies to everyone, and we cannot be saying it is wrong to do X, but by our own actions, we take to social media to ventilate our concerns. And I think that is the underlying message that in relation to technology, that should be a lesson for us all. It is something as well that I feel very strongly that even at Earlston Teachers Training College, that you would never, and Prime Minister always says this, that there was a time when you didn't have to tell people the right things to do. But that time has now come where it's almost as though you have to tell everybody all the time what they have to do. And I believe that even within the teaching profession, that there are some things that we may need to just address so that we don't take anything for granted anymore, that people know when they don't know. If it is our principals, if it is our administrators, we have to accept that we may not know everything and we may not do everything in the appropriate way, and we all have to be big enough to pause sometimes and to heed the guidance of others who may know a little bit more and be a bit more wise than us as well.
Thank you. I just have a question as well. You speak about technology and the use of Wi-Fi across the country for schools. What about the infrastructure for this? Because at least in my constituency, some of these schools just do not have the space. I know in others constituency, I think even the member for St. Michael East, one of the teachers took it upon himself to build the computer lab. What's happening on that front?
Yeah, there are about 10 primary schools right now that don't have the IT labs. In some cases, they don't have all the devices as yet either, and that's why the vote for this financial year, while it will go some way to helping, obviously it will not address all the issues. And that's why I go back to the fact that we rushed ahead with technology, but without making the adequate provision for how we were going to build out our infrastructure. I believe when EduTech was conceptualized, the intention was that we would have moved rapidly to be able to train our teachers, to be able to build out infrastructure, and to ensure that the IT rooms and the devices were there. Obviously, with changes in administration, the focus and the vision of EduTech obviously somehow got lost along the way. But if the intention had been followed through, many of these schools that would have been built out at the time would have provided for the use of technology, because Barbados was far ahead of the game in relation to technology at the time, and technology and the merger with education as well. So it is unfortunate that we're in that position now. We believe that the tablets would allow us, even where you do not have an IT room, to be able to deploy the tablets into the classroom. And in fact, when we had the meeting just a few days ago about how we would deploy with the funds that have been made available, we looked at those 10 primary schools that did not have IT labs, and we said that we would perhaps focus on those first to ensure that they were equipped in the shortest time frame. We have also looked at improving these spaces, because in some cases when I've visited, I've found there's been improper lighting. And part of our maintenance program right now is to try to look at phasing out some of the lighting across the school plants. One of the other concerns has been the issue of air conditioning in the rooms, because all of these IT labs require the additional input of AC units. So if any of the honourable members, including yourself, ma'am, would wish to donate to any of those schools the appropriate air conditioner units, we will be very much obliged to accept the donation as well. And I think that your main point is that we need to improve the facilities, the Wi-Fi connectivity, and that's why I addressed earlier that the budget for this year, in terms of our estimates, has allowed us to continue to roll out the connectivity across the school plans. The interesting thing is that since we have added the access points at the schools recently, one of the interesting things is that schools like Queen's College and St. George are at the peak in terms of compliance with use of technology. And it's not that in all areas there has been accessibility in terms of connectivity, but there has also been a willingness in terms of the teachers and certainly the leadership to embrace the technology and to utilize it. And I give that reference because oftentimes people feel that only at one end of the spectrum there is compliance. But I want to make the point that once you understand how technology can work for you, as leaders of institutions, you are prepared to embrace the technology that is put in front of you.
Thanks. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. There's a question or two, perhaps. We continue to hear some loud whispers relative to the UE operations, the financial stresses that institution seems to be facing. PADs being delayed, PADs being missed. The government took a position which I still support very strongly in restoring payment of student tuition for our students at the institution. The question is, what of it has been paid and what form the payment has taken, and if there's any outstanding with respect to that, and is that contributing to the UE situation of financial stress? Some people think so.
Betty Allen Headley, Permanent Secretary. The Ministry of Education makes a payment towards economic costs to the University of West Indies on a monthly basis. And we have been doing so regularly. The Ministry of Education Barbados is one of the ministries that have been paying regularly.
Ma'am, she said economic, sorry. I think I heard economic.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Perhaps I'd like to ask the Permanent Secretary and the Ministry whether she can confirm that the Ministry of Education entered an agreement along with the Ministry of Finance with the University of the West Indies that would have seen us, as part of our debt restructuring, agree to be able to give them more funds such that for the first 2 years, last year and this year, there would be no student fees paid by the government of Barbados because of the settlement of the debt that was owed by the previous administration to the University of the West Indies, and also because of the fact that we are about to vest the lands, 35 acres at the Lazaretto, the lands upon which the Cave Hill campus operates, which has never been vested, and then the St. Joseph Hospital, which will see it be invested into a special purpose company, which the government of Barbados will hold 30%, and the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill campus 70%. Could she please confirm these facts for me?
Madam Prime Minister, you are so correct. That correspondence was sent from the Ministry of Finance, signed by the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs.
And may I go further, that to the extent that the student fees go above either $20 or $21 million in last year and this year, that the Ministry of Education will pay the difference, correct?
Correct, Madam Prime Minister.
And in order for that to happen, you have to wait until bills are sent in, then for those bills to be reconciled against the students who have been admitted. Is that correct?
Madam Prime Minister, you're correct.
I think I've exhausted my 3 questions. I would have to.
Honourable Leader, the Opposition.
As a further clarification, so the ministry is saying that the government has been honoring its commitment and that nothing will
Do you have a question?
Madam Chair, that's a question.
Yes, it is. It was.
Is there a direct question that,
Madam
Clarify
Chair,
your question.
that's a question.
I
Is
know,
the
but
ministry
clarify it
saying
for the-
that
for the-
Is the ministry saying that the commitment made by the government to UWE is being honored and nothing is owed?
yes?
Can I get one more?
Yes, you may.
Huh? All right, 2 more. Tell me about the facility about 6 roads. What's the plan with respect to that? Is that your constituency, Madam Chair?
No, it is not.
That's in Philip
Honourable
West?
Leader of the Opposition. Yes, it is.
The school meals facility, sorry. What's the plan?
Thank you, Member. I think last year when we spoke on the issue of 6 roads, I indicated that I came to office assuming that we were going to be able to turn keys and move into the 6 roads facility, only to discover that there had been significant cost overruns at that facility under the last administration. We have spent the last few months negotiating with the contractor. We have had to meet with the subcontractors as well on the site with a view to trying to negotiate. There are lots of legal issues that I suspect will arise in relation to the non-payment of funds by the main contractor to subcontractors. The matter is currently before the Planning and Priorities body, so that we will return to them, I believe, on Friday with a view to putting a plan of action in place to take back over the facility by the ETMU department to ensure that that project is completed. But in its current form, we have not been able to reach an agreement in terms of the way forward with the contractor, and we've spent a lot of meetings trying to come to consensus, but we have not been able to come to consensus on the monies that he believes are owed to him. When we went to the facility, there was tremendous equipment in the facility. It is perhaps about 70% completed, but it will probably take between another 3 or 4 million to be able to complete. And there's lots of landscaping work that still has to be done. There was a dispute initially regarding the kitchen pipes, and that led to a long, protracted, drawn-out process of negotiation. The contractors indicating that he could proceed with the pipes as they were, and project manager disagreeing with the installation of the pipes and the ability of the pipes to take the temperature that would emanate from the kettles in the kitchen. As a consequence, we have agreed that we will move towards a termination of the agreement with a view to moving forward to restart the facility and get it back into operation in the shortest time frame.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleasant good morning to the Minister and her team. I want to welcome you back, Madam Chair, and I hope that you have a good experience today. I want to thank the Minister of Education, certainly, for her lucid presentation thus far. I want to say to her that education is really the foundation for growth and development in any country. and I want to applaud you for the work that you have done as minister since coming to office. My question dates back to the answer you gave the Member of Parliament for St. James South when you were talking about the increased visibility and work of guidance counselors within the schools. And that would take me back, of course, to sub-program 0272, Earlston Training College. I recognize that you would have put in an increase of $120,000 or so. My question to you, is there a robust program out there to ensure that teachers are given the training in psychosocial development and are equipped to be able to deal with students who present early with signs of dyslexia, processing deficit, ADHD, you name it? I want to know, because the reality is teachers spend most of their daylight time with students, more so than any guidance counselor. And I want to know if there is a specialized training component that will seek to address this deficiency. Certainly this was done in Grenada when they recognized that this was a problem, because we have a lot of students who are superannuated, who are deemed as delinquent, and are having all types of problems in terms of their behavior and how they are treated. I want to know how teachers are trained to deal with these things initially. And secondly, when these problems are identified, what is the established procedure to deal with these students? I'm really concerned about the amount of students who are superannuated, who are put out of schools, and I'm saying that the teachers are in a prime position to be able to recognize these things early and to be able to stimulate a procedure to deal with these issues. So if you can help me there, I would much appreciate it.
Joy Adamson, Acting Chief Education Officer. I can answer your last question, Minister Ford, and I will allow the principal from Earlston Teachers College to answer the first question. But we have discouraged the whole notion of superannuation and persons just sending students out of school. And we are working with the student support services to ensure that we put measures in place. We utilize a lot of the other external agencies to assist those students. There is a disciplinary committee. If persons have been expelled from school, they appeal to the minister. We have a disciplinary committee at the ministry, and we meet and we discuss with the parent and the student, and we look for alternative institutions to assign those persons to. So we are trying, wherever possible, to work with the students that we have in school, and we are trying to put things in place to assist the schools, the guidance counselors, and the principals and the teachers to make sure that we correct what that underlying problem is. We have started, and the minister would have alluded to this in the beginning of her presentation, we are working with the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, and we have a special program dealing with special needs, and we have several teachers in that program at Earlston Teachers Training College as we speak. But I will allow the principal from Earlston Teachers Training College, Dr. Saul, to talk about the programs that they have that will prepare the teachers, the student teachers, before they actually go into the classroom, and the ones who are in the classroom, the tools that they will have. Dr. Saul?
Good afternoon to all. I am pleased to be able to report that
Please introduce yourself, ma'am. Sorry.
Huh?
Please introduce yourself.
I am Patricia Saul, principal of Earlston Teachers Training College. I am pleased to report that our programs, our teacher training programs, are all structured to include components on human growth and development, which facilitate an understanding of how children grow and how their differences can be detected, and also activities that could be used to address those differences. In addition to that, there are courses in differentiated instruction, which allow teachers to select different courses to address those needs which are deviating from the norm. Particularly, there are courses in special needs education, so that those persons who might have areas like dyslexia and so on are identified and strategies put in place to deal with them. However, we recognize that because of the number of students who are presenting these problems, there is a greater need for us to pay attention to this particular aspect of care. And so as a college, we have started a unit, a diagnostic unit, which will diagnose children who are presented with certain difficulties, especially in the area of literacy, not only diagnosing their needs, but also developing strategies which teachers can use to intervene on behalf of these students so that these deficits are compensated so that these students don't leave school with those deficits. We are also working in the area of values education because we recognize that there are some students who have difficulty dealing with conflict. And so we have started to renew our emphasis on values education so that we're teaching our children how to deal with conflict in a very amicable way. So these are some of the ways that we are trying to address the difficulties which have presented in the education system to ensure that all of our students get to achieve their full potential.
I want you to be a little bit more specific. I want to know if there's a particular course that, a one-off course or whatever, that Erdeston, your training college, that you have as a prerequisite for teachers to be qualified as it relates to identifying students who present with maladaptive patterns of behavior. And so you can identify, first off, as a teacher, this problem is not the norm. It is not because the child is hard ears, but we have another underlying problem in terms of psychosocial, domestic, whatever. Is there a particular course that Erdeston Teachers Training College have there that teachers must pass before they come out to teach at our schools?
I'll reiterate what I said earlier, that all of our training programs, whether it be at the primary or the secondary level, include components which allow teachers to be able to recognize differences and difficulties. However, when it comes to specialized intervention, we do not have the skills to do that. That specialized intervention is done by the Ministry of Education through their psychologists and through their social workers. What we can do, we can implement some classroom strategies to help to differentiate the instruction so that those children who have different learning needs and learning styles are accounted for. However, when it comes to really specialized care, we can only relay that information to the Ministry of Education, and the officers there are skilled to do that sort of intervention.
My only small concern is that the length of time it takes to get that intervention, the teachers to stimulate that process. By that time, most children sometimes are written off as being slow learners, or the dupsy, or something is wrong with them, more so than we recognizing that this is a underlying medical problem that needs the specialized help. So if there could be a course developed where the early indicators that teachers can identify from early, these are early indicators to underlying problem, I think that will go a long way.
What our diagnostics center will do is to provide more discrete analysis for those children who might be presented with difficulties in school. So if you have a child in the school, let's say, who's at class 2 and is not reading, and you can identify that particular child to diagnostic center, we can do the investigation to find out exactly where the problem is, and then identify, having profiled the child, identify strategies that can be used to move that child forward. That's what we can do as a college, and that's what we're trying to set up the center to facilitate.
So just for my understanding, every teacher is trained to pick up these children,
Yes.
in essence.
Yes.
And then they're referred to a specialized area or person to go from there,
Yes.
basically?
Every teacher is trained.
Right.
Having been exposed to the characteristics of development, every teacher is trained to identify when there are children who, for whatever reason, deviate from that trend or from those characteristics. However, every teacher is not trained to be able to intervene, depending on the nature of the intervention that is needed. Some intervention needs to be done by a specialized psychologist. However, what we can do is to identify, here's a student who is presented with some problems, who might need some expert intervention. That much we can do.
Understood. Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And like all the other members, it's happy to see you here. I hope these conditions are as favorable to you as they could be. I also wish the same for the Honourable Leader, Education Minister as well, that these conditions are kinder to you. I have two questions, and the first is directly in the estimates under sub-program 7100, where the other personal emoluments have increased, but they've doubled from 998 to 2 million, and the statutory emoluments have increased by 400,000, and 0 to 70, where your other personal emoluments has also doubled, and 0302, where you have also 5 times the increase in professional services. So my first question is, in relation to all of these increases in emoluments, if this represents an increase in the number of personnel being hired by the ministry, and if so, under which areas? And perhaps the PS maybe. So it's 7,100 and your OPE, it goes from 998 to 2.06 million. And then OPE under 270 goes from 28 to 59,000. Perhaps, Madam Chair, could I ask my second question about the PS, because I'll ask the second question to the Minister while the PS does that. My other question relates to the work that has been going on, the physical work in terms of the infrastructure. There have been some concerns that there were some delays in the schools being reopened, but I've heard you express a view that there were a number of schools that wanted repair. Could you speak to some of those schools? What were the nature of the repair that had to be done? What informed the position of the ministry in terms of doing these repairs? And if there are any schools for immediate repair, perhaps at the Garrison School, the Great and Silly School in my constituency, but more so the nature of the repair and what you found.
While we wait on the information for your first question, we inherited quite a mess. The amount of money that had been allocated for the plants, the infrastructure, was certainly below par for the last decade. One of our biggest challenges was that really, if we are to systematically deal with infrastructural needs as well as the ongoing maintenance, we need perhaps about 6 million per annum. Last year, while we had gotten just over 3.2, I believe, initially, Prime Minister, after a desperate plea from the Ministry of Education, through the Ministry of Finance, agreed to increase that amount to take us just over the 5 million. What that allowed us to do as a ministry was to, instead of just touching the surface in terms of the decaying plant, and just dealing with 17 schools, we were able to actually impact 41 schools across the primary school system. Granted, we had delays, and at the time when the funds were committed, the Prime Minister did say it was ambitious, you're going to have some challenges, but I refused to back down because what I saw as I visited plant after plant was an environment in which I could not talk about big picture items like reform if I did not settle the environment in which people were going to school to teach and to learn. So I accept that we had the delays at the start of the semester. Sometimes because of the history of how things would have worked in the ministry, one of the challenges that we had was that when persons highlight that there are 8 weeks to do work in the summer, you come to find that it's really about 5 weeks because it takes 1 week for mobilization. There's 1 week that you lose at the end in relation to the teaching staff going back into the school and the cleanup of the school. So you're somewhere between a 5 and a 6 week period where you really need to do the work. Now, when the initial projections were submitted, there were a number of plants that required 8 weeks in order to complete. So we had some situations where we needed to have the contractors work overtime in order to really catch up, and that really contributed to some of the delays. The other issue that we are presented with often is the issue of painting, because while we try to use the low order paints, it is difficult to, to reopen school knowing that there are people who are very sensitive to the smell and the odor of paint. The other issue that we have encountered is that in terms of the history of the ministry, there had not been a proper maintenance program. So what you would find is that the ministry became a ministry of emergencies. Every time a call was made and there was kawich or there was, broken pipes or environmental issues, the ministry became a response mechanism to the emergency, similar to how we've been dealing with violence, okay? We have tried in the last year, and I believe while even there was a delay in the opening, when I look at the number of schools that we've had to close, truthfully, it has not been for the major infrastructural issues that I inherited. We have had issues with water. We have had issues with external factors where persons and communities have been spray painting, and as a consequence of the smells or the use of chemicals, it has impacted the school environment depending on the temperature at the time in the atmosphere or in terms of the wind factors as well. We have taken the decision in the ministry that we're not going to put the lives of students and teachers at risk, and as soon as we are able to identify the source of the problem, we have no other option, my immediate response is let us close, because it ends up being worse when we don't. And again, I think I just want to state for the record that we don't take any pleasure in closing schools or relocating schools, because we are limited in where we can place an entire school population. So we have to really choose carefully and make the decision wisely in terms of how we close and when we close as well. But a lot of the issues that have led to closures in this last semester have really been external to the plant. In the case of the school, Graydon Sealy, which is near and dear to your heart, member, we had some issues with the rodent population there, which is not uncommon at other institutions. Again, a lot of times the school is impacted by its surroundings as well. That plant, however, is really, it is an eyesore in the context of the lack of attention that has been paid to the Graydon City School over the last few years. We have committed some funds, and they have actually started to work on the plant, changing out some of the windows because the windows are very old. We've tried to focus on a lot of spalding because a lot of the cement structure has been compromised, and there are a lot of structural issues at the institution. But the reality is it is a very central institution, not just for catchment for your area, but a number of the surrounding areas. But we've never, in previous administrations, paid the attention to that plant as is necessary. Ministry of Finance would have allocated some funds for us to address Graydon Sealy, the Grantley Adams School as well. in relation to landscaping, to try to green the area, to also address the issue of bathrooms, which has been a problem across the system as well, and also to remove a number of the windows, the old windows that exist in the facility. What I will tell you, however, is that when we came to office, we started with an audit of the secondary schools, and Graydon Sealy was one of those schools, obviously, that was on the top of the list. We also have recently started, through the assistance of the IDB, to look at our primary schools in terms of preparing an audit. Why this is important is because we are not waiting until funds become available in this economy to then make the hard decisions to assess what funding is necessary. I believe that while we are trying to out the fire, we also have to be trying to lay the foundation for what is to come. And so we are trying to assess very clearly what is needed so that, as the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance has done such an excellent job in terms of being able to put us in a situation where we can now peep our head up a little bit more and deal with our creditors and certainly not be at risk in terms of our dollar. It gives us the opportunity, as we prepare this information, to know that in the long term, that we will be in a better position to borrow financing to be able to build out the infrastructure in the way that is necessary. So it may be a loan over a 15 or 20-year period, as opposed to trying to just put a little bit of water in the bucket right now. Granted, we have received the funding for this year in terms of being able to address a number of schools. We are focused on using that money not only in relation to the domestic summer program, but also addressing a lot of the maintenance issues in the schools. We've started to termite treat as well, because what we were finding was that new repairs were taking place in schools, but the termite infestation had not been dealt with. And I think we all know what happens when you don't treat the termite areas. It will go into the new wood. So it was a case where we were sinking money repeatedly into the same institutions and responding because there were emergencies, but not taking a step back and looking at how we could systematically address the overall problems. So in fairness to the closures for this last year, I must tell you that our bills in relation to the water, the utilities, you'll see about 4 million in relation to water, and it has been increasing repeatedly, primarily because, just like what the Ministry of Water Resources is dealing with, the Ministry of Education is also dealing with at a micro level. The failure to repair the plumbing facilities is now impacting the old plants, and unless we are able to repair the pipes in the schools, we are seeing the leakages within the school plant as well. So the reason why the bill, even in terms of the utilities, is so high is because we have been constantly trying to deal with the issues of plumbing across the school plants presently. And so going forward, we have identified some schools. We still have to do our inspections, so I will not identify schools specifically right now, because now that we have been allocated the funds, of course we asked for a substantially higher amount. So we will now have to make some adjustment in terms of prioritizing those schools. But as we did last year, we will do the same this year, which is meet with the unions and take them on our tour of the various schools so that they are fully apprised of the issues as presented to us, and that they have an understanding as well as to our priorities and what resources we have available to us to address the problems that are confronting us.
Okay, in relation to the question asking why the personal emoluments increased to 2.0363. Remember earlier, the minister would have indicated that we are about to do interviews for school safety officers and social workers. We would have written to the minister responsible for the public service to make a request for those additional persons, and approval would have been granted. Once approval was granted, we made provision for those persons in the estimates, so we are ready to begin the interview process for those persons.
Honourable Member for St. George North. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing the opposition, the backbench. The executive would have had their say, but I want to thank you. A question that was asked by the executive, a member of the executive, about consultants. I believe that that question is important, even though the minister have said that she would have done something about that consultancy. I believe the Parliament need to know more about that particular consultancy. I want to thank the minister, though, for doing a relatively great service in the field of education. I want to ask the question, though, what is the one program that the ministry would have devised to ensure that these children become good citizens? For example, I have always held the view that values and so on are taught by the various schools. Today, children do not go to Sunday school. The values seem to be lacking. I want to know what is the one program that the ministry has selected to help these children become good citizens today. And my first question. The minister also spoke about the need to look at the 11+ exam. I believe in itself that 11+ is not a big problem, but a select few should not be able to relocate or remove the 11+ from our landscape. I believe that there's a need for a referendum to look at if the public believe the 11+ in its present form should be removed or if it should be continued. Now, I have said last year at a similar exercise that the 11+ in itself, the way how it is conducted, it is done in a reverse. That is, the placement of children should be done after the exam. And I have always held that view. I held that view for years. I was a member of the teaching fraternity. But in terms of transportation, children are selected before the exam is completed. And that has always been the problem, especially when you have to look. So I want to hear the minister on these views. Should it be that the ministry itself, with the executive, select if the 11+ should be abandoned, or should we have a referendum to allow the public of Barbados to have their views on this, because it is a big problem in Barbados at this time?
Member, before you start, please clarify what you meant about children are selected before the 11+.
Today, children have to select the schools. You select the schools before the exam is held. And children today travel all across Barbados in search of that school. And we definitely need to look at that as a problem.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will touch on your first question simply by saying we have said as a party that only on wedge issues that there would be a referendum. I am not aware that this is a wedge issue. I think that the same way we came to office on many other issues, I think that we will intend to deal with this issue of common entrance in the same way, which is that the widest possible consultation must take place with the public. But I think all of the academic knowledge and intellectual persons having weighed in have indicated that the time has now come for us to replace something which really has become a stranglehold around a large percentage of our population. You know, when I think of the fact that the United Kingdom, who bestowed this examination on us, has long time abolished it, I am at pains to understand why we want to hold on as an educated nation to something that really has created such great inequalities in the system. I do believe we have all come through the system, and I think we have something to offer. You yourself, you have had the experience in Canada, and I believe that there are lessons, certainly from Canada, that can be imparted in our own system as we try to carve out for ourselves our own identity and what it is that we want to be reflected by our student population. So I just want to reiterate, we will speak with the widest voice to the widest amount of people in the country. Just as we're doing with regathering, we will go the length and breadth to ensure that not only the adults participate in this process, but I know I certainly spoke to the committee recently, coming out of a conversation I had with a young lady in St. Peter when we launched the regathering there, who said to me, Minister, will I be allowed to participate in the discussion on the 11 plus? Because she has something to say as well. She was age 10, she's about to do the 11 plus, and I think that this is not a decision that adults alone can participate in, or educators, but our children should also be asked about the impact on them in preparing for a rigid examination, which determines for most of them, you know, the rest of their life. And many of them, I think, would want to weigh in on this important decision that will change certainly the way in which we educate our people. In relation to your question about a program to help persons to become good citizens, there is a program called the Health and Family Life Education Program, which is taught in the schools. We also try to bring in external support persons to help the guidance counselors to teach this as well. The support in terms of family life and education is also provided by a number of the social workers who actually interface with the students as well. And we have been using more and more recently the partnerships with the NGOs, as well as the additional social workers to be able to deal with issues of conflict resolution. Do I think that we need to do more in terms of giving young people a greater appreciation of self and creating what, as we have termed as a party of their national consciousness? I do believe that we have to do more. And one of the things we've started to look at in terms of the curriculum is how to transform the curriculum in such a way that it becomes more relevant to the needs of the student population. So it must be that a student leaving school must understand their history. And their history, not in the context of America or the United Kingdom, but their history in terms of Barbadians and persons who have labored to build out the landscape of Barbados. A number of the students doing history has been declining, and I do feel strongly, particularly recently, as we have been burying so much of our fallen heroes on the political landscape, and certainly the literary landscape and education landscape, that we have a responsibility in the ministry to ensure that our young people connect with people who have helped to build out not just Barbados, but who have been global icons across the world. And so more and more, rather than waiting until people die, I think it is important that we give them a grounding that Barbadians can achieve not just here, but across the world. And that is a responsibility that I believe this ministry has to take back where the train has kind of run off track, and to put things back on the right trajectory for our young people. So I agree with you. I think ethics and citizenship was once taught as well. In terms of Christian values, I think I would accept a number of young people have, or young adults, have removed the ability of children to go to Sunday school. They have rejected that element in their life, and unfortunately and regrettably, they have not replaced it with anything. And I do feel that many of us benefited from being able to collide with right and wrong, with a Psalms or a Proverbs, and we really need to get back to a point where people can make decisions based on right and wrong and some kind of very strong value system. And yes, the time has perhaps come where we have to teach it a bit more, as opposed to assuming that parents will teach it, or that it will be taught external to the home. Now, the school alone cannot carry this burden. And therefore, parents also have a responsibility to carry some of the weight and to shoulder some of the weight that is being felt in the educational system. So we understand that there are families that are broken. We get that. But at the same time, I know that with the member for St. Thomas's ministry, we will be working over the next couple of months to be able to implement a few parental education programs. And we have made available the Urduson Teachers Training College as well to allow for that additional support to take place. So unlike other administrations before, we intend to work together with particularly the social care ministries to ensure that we address the issues in education. Honourable Member.
My supplementary question there has to do with the fact that too many children are coming out of the school system without certification. And, well, it starts from the primary level. Too many children go into the secondary school scoring between 0 and 30 marks. What is being done in the Ministry of Education to ensure that the majority, I mean, there will be some students, yes, going on who, because of their mental age, have problems. But to my mind, too many children are coming out of school without certification. And it has to be addressed at the primary level first, and then at the secondary level. So we definitely need to look carefully at that big problem that we have in the school system today. Is it that the teachers are not teaching or the children are not learning? Can you explain that to us?
Let me just start first by saying that a lot of these systems that had been set up have been dismantled. And we spoke a lot earlier about assessments and interventions. And we are trying our best to get back to a point where before we make a judgment on a child, that we first of all understand and appreciate what are the dynamics that lead the child to act out in a particular way. So you've heard from Dr. Saul from Urduson what we're doing there. Obviously with the additional resources in terms of the social work services and the guidance counselors, and strengthening of student support services, we're trying to build a network of persons around young people to be able to avoid the fallout. Now, there are a number of partners that we have been working with. We've been in discussions with the Entrepreneurship Foundation, the Barbados Youth Development Council as well, looking at how entities such as those can engage with young people in the schools to be able to help to prepare them for the world of work. And as I think you would be aware, member, there's also the First Job Initiative, which we will be unfolding, I believe, through the Honourable Member for St. Peter shortly, in relation to providing an opportunity for young people when they leave school to almost seamlessly transition into some kind of apprenticeship, because we recognize that that has been a major problem over the years. People are qualified or they're not fully qualified, but they're not able to go to learn a trade, or they're not able to apply what they have learned. And I think programs like even the Youth Advanced Corps have also taken into account that you may not have had the certification in school, but you also now need in a formal program to be able to acquire the relevant certification and also some kind of apprenticeship to help you to transition into the work environment. One of the things that we are seeing, and we have seen in the last year in relation to the transition from primary to secondary, is the numbers have been dropping in terms of the performance in maths and in English. And there was a time when I think Barbados was, we used to boast that we were 99% literate. I think there has been cause for concern in terms of our abilities and what we are seeing in terms of the numbers. Many of the schools that we are seeing in terms of their academic performance in these areas require strengthening. And so we've been looking at the reading programs with a view to bringing back a number of the things that work well for the ministry and work well for Barbados. Because whether people like it or not, there's one thing that we must never do, and it is to dismantle systems that obviously were set up initially to be able to address these issues. And I will forever go back to when my leader was the Minister of Education, and the member for St. Thomas was in that ministry, because I can go through book after book and paper after paper on strategies that were developed in the educational system to deal with assessments, to identify behaviors, to be able to do diagnostic testing, to be able to do all of these assessments, so that not only did you know what was wrong, but then you had a stream through which children's issues were addressed. Something as simple as the criterion reference test was intended before you get to the 11+ exam to be able to identify what was necessary in terms of an individual education plan for our students. And part of our reform committee is looking at the concerns expressed by or teachers and persons who use the assessment to be able to see how we can fine-tune it to make it fully usable within the educational system. So I understand that, I share with you, member, when I first came to the ministry, I too was of the view that we had to take down the 11+ exam because it was a problem. And I still feel that way, but I also along the way recognize that if the testing that needs to be done prior to 11 is not done, then we find ourselves in a situation where we are disposing of children and sending them to schools without the requisite skills and the proper assessments. So it's not any one examination that is the issue. We have to fine-tune a number of our systems so that we do justice to the students within our educational system.
Okay, thank you. Member, you made reference just now to a consultant. You haven't named the consultant. I'm not sure that you would want, I believe that you should tell this Parliament, because consultants, if they're selected or they're employed, should let the public know what they're doing. And I think that you will do this Parliament a disservice if you do not name that consultant, because we definitely need to know that persons who are employed by the state to provide a service should provide that service.
I have not begged leave of the chairman to name persons in this debate. But I will say that it is regrettable that we reached this stage in the ministry where that level of a consultancy was engaged in the first place because of the political connections of the individual. And ma'am, I would crave your indulgence. I believe the individual that would have been engaged by the then minister through the ministry was Dennis Holder. And I reiterate that none of the reports that had been submitted at the time had been given the requisite consultation with the student support department that would have been necessary to take the steps for intervention into the various schools that were highlighted in those reports.
Thank you. I have a quick question. It could be a yes or no answer. We're discussing curricula and so on with respect to the schools. I know it's not under your purview as much as I could understand. But what's happening with the children of the government industrial school in terms of their curricula? I've been having a lot of concerns from parents that they're not following through with respect to CXC examinations and so on. Does the Ministry of Education have any part to play in that?
Presently, we do not have a role in terms of a GIS, does not fall under the ambit of the Ministry of Education. I believe it did fall under the ministry previously, but it falls under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So I believe when that head is debated, the Honourable Minister will be able to speak to it in greater detail. But what I can say to you is that we have been in discussions with Home Affairs about the role that education can play in helping those young people, because again, we accept that we can't discard them because they have gotten in trouble with the law. And the main focus of this administration has to be the issue of reform and making sure that people can change their lives with the requisite skills to be able to come back out to be productive citizens as well. So those discussions are ongoing to see how we can play a greater role in strengthening the existing skills and academic subjects that are actually being taught on the curriculum at the institution.
Thank you. Honourable Member for the City.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I start by first of all thanking the Honourable Minister and her team for the amount of information that is being shared here with us today. And I want to especially congratulate those persons who are responsible for the management and the delivery of technical and vocational training in this country, because I think that is one of the major vehicles that will take us to the destination that we are seeking to go, which is to transform the social and economic landscape of our fair land. And the question that I have is whether or not the ministry and indeed the country, whether or not we're doing enough to rationalize and even synergize the efforts at the Polytechnic, the Vocational Training Board or Institute, as well as the TVET Council, rationalize and synergize in a way that would elevate the status of this training. And this is training that I believe, subject to correction, that the demand for has now outstripped the capacity of the ministry to deliver. And I am wondering if along the lines of the Prime Minister announcing on Honourable Day 3 new scholarships in non-traditional areas that I believe were more vocational and technologically oriented, whether or not there's any effort to ensure that those Barbadians who are following this stream of education or training, whether they are able to develop on a parallel track with academic education in terms of qualifications and reaching the highest level of qualification. And I'm not sure, for example, how much we are doing as a country in relation to city and guilds qualifications. I know that used to be a very important thing in the past. And I also am cognizant of the fact that in some countries like the United Kingdom, that a city and guilds qualification carries more weight than the academic qualification. So I'm wondering where we are going in this direction, and I hope that you'll be able to provide some answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. We've been expanding the examination assessments beyond the traditional areas. The CVQ qualification is not just at the tertiary level, but it is also in the secondary schools as well. And City of Guild, we have been engaged in a number of pilots in the secondary schools to give an additional option to students who may want to follow and pursue that area as well. In discussions with the staff in the ministry, one of the things that we've realized is that we have to begin the discussion in the public domain about alternate exams. No longer can it be that people believe that there's only one stream for certification, because there are several streams for certification to be able to identify competency. And so we have spent a lot of time looking at giving more and more students the options, particularly when we examine the data that is available to us that is suggesting that a lot of more students are interested in skills and technical and vocational areas. So to answer your question, it is a resounding yes. We have also been bringing together all of the tertiary institutions with a view to ensuring that there is less duplication of programs as well, because we were finding that there were some programs that everybody was trying to do. And while there may be popular programs, we also need to ensure that we are not duplicating. And so we have had the opportunity to put all of the various principals in a room and all the various parties to be able to look at how we rationalize the system in such a way that people can see from secondary school a clear stream and pathway in terms of certification from secondary level 1, level 2, on to level 3, level 4 at tertiary. And we have even been in discussions about the occupational degrees as well, that we hope that we can introduce very soon in this area as well. University of West Indies has not been left out of that conversation as well, because they too are aware of the thrust of this administration in being able to build out the technical and vocational area. But we have had tremendous success in the pilots that have been done in the secondary schools, and those students feel very proud that they've been able to acquire a level of certification that they can go on to use in some form of employment. But we are expanding the number of options as well available to us at the Barbados Vocational Training Board, as well as SJPI as well.
All done. Honourable Member for St. James North. She started here from my watch. We went next. So we'll go 17. You're welcome.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chair. Minister, Honourable Minister, I commend, of course, your leadership of this extremely challenging and significant ministry. I congratulate you, I think, on your well-deserved honor by Media House of Personality of last year. And wanted to expand a bit on what you started to speak on in terms of the need for change of curriculum in our schools, both primary and secondary, and you correctly referred to the endeavors of now Honourable Prime Minister, then Minister of Education, in your position about 20 years ago, I think 2001 exactly, when she was Minister of Education, in terms of the last change in curriculum at our schools with the Honourable, our colleague Honourable Member of St. Thomas as her Parliamentary Secretary. For 2 decades, we really haven't had a change in curriculum. Nothing done whatsoever in the last decade under the last government. And of course, the world has evolved tremendously since then in terms of more technology, more necessity for critical thinking of our people, a greater need for vocational training, a greater need for the ability to work as a team, a greater need to resolve problems without resorting to violence, a greater need for anger management. And all of these are aspects that we therefore need to train our young people in. But also, there is a need on us as policymakers, as obviously leaders of government, and for the officials in your ministry to facilitate the training of our young people in terms of entrepreneurial skills and more business-like attitude, because we've reached a stage, certainly in our development and historical context, even if it wasn't so previously, where government can't employ everyone, and therefore this psyche of looking towards government for a job even after you come out of university with a management degree has to be nullified, and therefore we need to look more, in my submission, at creating more and a greater entrepreneurial spirit among our young people. I remember when I raised that issue in the last Parliament, your predecessor in the last government laughed it off and said how I want little children to become entrepreneurs. But that, of course, demonstrated the narrow and myopic thinking of the last government, and the then Minister of Education was no exception to that rule. And I'm therefore wondering, Honourable Minister, what plans, strategies your ministry may have in terms of creating a greater entrepreneurial spirit among our young people, and therefore assisting in their capacity and ability to employ themselves when they become young adults, but not only to be able to employ themselves, but to expand their business capacity, that they could employ their communities as well, those in their communities, especially taking into account the extremely noble initiative of this government to create the trust loans concept, and to have Youth Advance scheme and all the other initiatives that this government has taken.
Thank you, Honourable Member. My predecessor was perhaps too busy doing financial planning for his retirement and taking up positions otherwise, so he would not have been focused on entrepreneurship at the time. I, however, come from a background where I was a brownie at primary school. I remember learning how to make rock cookies, and I made some really good rock cookies, and as a consequence, I started my own rock cookie business. And I used to take the rock cookies to school, and I used to sell them. And when that business took off, I started to get my mom to fry chicken and sell that too at school and made some more money. I therefore support entrepreneurial activity from the youngest age, and I certainly in my own community, I try to encourage young people to get engaged in an activity which can make them money. When we look across our school system, there are young people repeatedly who are getting in trouble for selling Kool-Aids, who are doing vending at school. It says to me that the entrepreneurial spirit, just as it was with me, is certainly in many of them. We may not like sometimes what they are selling, but the fact is that if we hone that skill and that understanding of themselves in terms of what they would like to do to make money, that potentially we may have young entrepreneurs in the making. So I am certainly in favor of a curriculum that is going to lean in the direction of empowering our young people as opposed to making them think that they must work for someone. I don't like to see when schools send home students with sponsor sheets where they have to go out and beg, you know, the $1, $2, $5, and they go out. I like the approach that I've seen in a number of the private institutions where students are taught the basics in terms of marketing, formulating a business plan, and being able, even if it is a Kool-Aid, to be able to take the concept from idea to market. And I feel that just as they do in a private institution, that we have to ingrain that in our primary schools and our secondary schools, that young people start to see themselves not as beggars, but as persons who can determine their own destiny through setting up their own businesses. It should not be that our young people alone say they want to work for somebody, but they have to start thinking about how they can be young entrepreneurs themselves. And how are we going to do it? We have to do it with relationship building with existing entities. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. The Entrepreneurship Hub is doing an excellent job in terms of initiatives in this area, and it therefore means that the ministry will have to partner more with entities like that, and I'm sure there are others. There was the $20 challenge, which allowed young people again to take a $20 bill and turn that money into a business idea. And we saw a number of ideas being generated from those initiatives. It therefore means that when young people are being criticized, they're being sometimes criticized wrongfully, because we just need to be able to create the opportunities to get them to start to think about what it is that they would like to see and like to shape. So I give you the assurance that it is one of the areas that we are very keen on engaging with the private sector on and the NGOs to ensure that we can build out in a very short time frame a change of thinking in the way we approach entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ideas.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry,
Sorry,
some follows up.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, Chair, I should have located my question within the context of, obviously, the estimates, because one of the strategic goals of the ministry is to promote and foster at all educational levels a culture of critical thinking, research, and an entrepreneurial outlook. And my follow-up question now is on disabilities, education for people with disabilities. Of course, another strategic goal is to provide special educational facilities for the disadvantaged to enable them to lead full, active, and interesting lives. And of course, we are signatories to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And Honourable Minister, I think it was in July last year, in her leading off debate on a resolution for a supplementary for the Ann Hill School. I think it was about $200,000, I believe, would have went into detail in her contribution to Parliament on what was her vision for education for children with disabilities and what her ministry had in the pipeline to advance that. And I'm just wondering, Honourable Minister what progress has been made in those last 8 odd months towards your goals in trying to better the educational opportunities for children with disabilities and to give them a chance, as is their right as Barbadian citizens, to fulfill their potential in this country and to be able to realize all the benefits and opportunities that everyone else ought to have.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It started with an investment, first of all, in the plant, because when I came with the supplementary for the monies to complete the anthill basement, it was against a background where the last administration had neglected to complete the classrooms for those special children. And I felt that a first priority for this ministry was to ensure that we completed it so that we could give the requisite space to those students, many of whom were in cramped conditions at the time and needed the additional classroom space in the basement to be able to engage in additional activities. We also placed some additional resources at the institution to build out not just the anthill, but the annex as well, the Irving Wilson School as well, because we wanted to create an area where life skills could also be conducted, so that many of these persons with disabilities would also have the opportunity to learn basic things like fixing a bed, boiling water to make tea, setting a table. There are improvements that we still have to make to the plant, and really the corporate sector can also get involved in helping us with a number of these special needs institutions, as they've been graciously helping with all of the other primary schools as well. But there are facilities at Anthill, for instance, which have a kitchenette area, and also an area which can teach the young people the life skills that are necessary to manage themselves in a household. I believe strongly that we need the additional support to help build that out on a wider scale. There are also plans in place to build out the carpentry program and to move towards a CVQ qualification. There is a workshop at the Irving Wilson School which has the potential to be an income generator for the institution once the students can get the resources to be able to engage in making craft as well. And I think the basement at Anthill is also to be utilized for teaching crafts, which then can be another entrepreneurial opportunity for those students. In conjunction with the Ministry of Environment, we had also cleared the area to the back of both the Anthill and the Irving Wilson School last year with a view to beginning once again the agricultural program, which would again help to bring in some much needed revenue, but also engage the young people at the institutions in an agricultural program and certainly a petting zoo. It was so interesting that persons from the surrounding areas actually started to raise some sheep, which then I believe now have formed part of the program at the school to engage those children when they go out into the play area to the back of the school. So those are two that we try to focus heavily on, because I believe that given the proximity, those institutions needed a complete facelift. They needed the resources to be able to build out capacity. And we are working closely with the other entities to also look at their needs as well in this financial year to be able to see how we can better partner to improve the resources there. But I believe we have to take it one step at a time in terms of being able to address that particular area and to get the plants, those first two plants, in good working order so that we can then ease some of the pressure on some of the other institutions as well. We have also been providing places at the Derek Smith School as well, because we have seen a shortage of places within our own institutions. And I firmly believe that where we can rely on the private sector to provide the necessary education for our young people, that we should avail ourselves of those opportunities if we don't have the requisite resources. So they have also graciously taken in, I believe, 8 students last year and 8 students the year before, who are doing well in that particular institution. So I give you that assurance as well, Minister, that that community will be well looked after under my watch.
Okay, just thank you, Minister. One final supplementary, Chair, and this relates to University of the West Indies education, and of course, an Honourable Minister touched on it in her opening remarks, the issue of the policy of this government that in return for now again restored state-funded tuition fees for the Barbadian students at the University of the West Indies, after the last government callously and dismissively and uncaringly imposed tuition fees on Barbadian students, and therefore poor students from poor working class homes had to stop their university education, were forced to a very large degree, even some of those with just 2 semesters to go, and something, quite frankly, that is a sad and embarrassing mark on the political and social development of this country. But after, of course, Honourable Minister, if I recall, it was in July or August 2018, within certainly 3 months after this Barbados Labour Party graciously took over the reins of government of this country, you in Parliament announced the policy that the government, the state, was again going to fund tuition fees of university students. But we agreed as a matter of policy that the students would, in return, do voluntary service to the communities in which they serve, community of Barbados. And I'm just wondering if you can give a report on where that policy, where that program is at, and what, if any, have been the constraints so far in terms of full implementation of that policy.
Honourable Minister, I believe that you may not have caught my comments in the opening remarks, but I did champion that we had not only restored tuition fees, but also that the Give Back app had been launched and students had started to register. And I was hopeful that by the start of the next academic term, that we would have full registration and implementation of the Give Back component. We have been very successful in having a number of volunteer entities come to the fore, and certainly been able to keep the engagement of our student population and interest in the program. You know, they've had lots of questions in relation to how it will roll out and which are the entities that are they can avail themselves of. But generally, we have been relatively pleased with the rollout of the project. We partnered with the Ministry of Science and Smart Technology, Innovations and Science, and I'm pleased to say to you that the Give Back app was created, produced, designed by a Barbadian for Barbadians. And we worked well with the Ministry of Innovation to be able to address a number of the concerns and to be able to roll out that particular application. So right now the students are registering. They're indicating the entities that they are interested in participating in volunteer service with. Entities are signing up, indicating the types of services that they provide, and also we are making a call to obviously others to get on board, but there has been a great interest thus far from both communities in terms of the participation. In terms of fine-tuning, if we have to fine-tune, we will fine-tune. But I think based on the launch, the general reception was rather positive. The students were eager to really just get on board and start to volunteer. And I certainly shared my own experiences as a young student with Senator Cummins and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central as well. at the Barbados Community College, where without any formal program in place, we were engaged in an environmental and anti-drug organization. And we went around to several persons whose families were in prison. We visited the prisons. We even spoke in several schools as well about narcotics and the use of narcotics. And it was pleasing to know that we now have a formal program for encouraging young people to get on board. But we didn't require it back then. But it was very, very heartwarming to know that young people could now participate in this way and recognize that to whom much is given, much is certainly expected. So again, I would just encourage through you, ma'am, that others can come on board still. The process is very straightforward, but we will continue to monitor the entities to make sure that there is full compliance with the rules and objectives of the program. But this is, again, yet another promise made and a promise kept that we would restore the tuition fees and also ensure that our young people appreciate the investment that has been made in them.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know when you propose to take a break, but I got about 7 questions left of the 12 or 13 I had originally. I'll share 2 or 3 with you now and give way. Relate to the numbers. The budgeted figure for the estimates of this current year that ends shortly was $14 million, and I recognize that the actual
He's right there. He's next.
the actual figure projected for the end of the same year is now $28 million, so a 100% increase. That's on the program 040, so just wanted to get some enlightenment on that, the need for that massive increase in the year which is now ending. There's also overspend, an increase of $12 million in account 271 for the 2019-2020 year as well, the current year. So we are, in one instance, 14 to 28 million, and in the other instance, $12 million beyond what was projected for the current year, which is now coming to an end. Just wanted to ask for an explanation on those 2. And then there's a $1.8 million transfer scheduled for, and the proposed estimates for the year coming for privately assisted private schools. Just wanted to ask the minister or somebody in the team to identify for me the private schools which are being assisted, and what is the breakdown with respect to those transfers. And the last question at this time has to do with the school meals department. You're projecting a $19.6 million transfer to school meals department on account 275. Now, I seem to get the impression that sir, with that, Madam Chair, that some of the agencies, entities, which are provided with meal services and government's expenditure have recognized that the financial constraints have impacted the menu, and therefore asking with respect to the school meals department as to whether this is the case, what are our children eating, and what will the $19.6 million around that operation help to provide?
Honourable Member, regrettably, we had not been hearing everything that you said.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, the first one I think we captured, where you spoke to an increase, I believe, in the personal emoluments.
040, an increase of 14 million, 100%, and in 277, an overspend, well, not an overspend on the projected for last year of 12 million. That was the first question. And then I asked with reference to the schools, private schools receiving assistance.
Right.
To identify those schools if we could, and the breakdown of the amounts being transferred in that 1.8 million. And then how has the current economic situation impacted the menu provided for our children under the school meal service program?
I'll ask Ms. Dawn Brown to just address you on the last question first. Who is the manager of the school meals department?
Dawn Brown, Manager, Acting School Meals Department. As far as how the current financial situation would have impacted the School Meals Department, obviously we've had to make some changes as far as what we are offering on the menus and such. But we've tried to make those changes in such a way that we're also making changes to the nutritional quality of the meals that we're sending out to our schools. We have tried where possible to reduce the amount of items that we are using that are being imported. We are looking more at using local products and locally produced products. We have been working with the BADMC to where we're getting a lot of our vegetables and such from them, so that we're using more locally grown vegetables and products that they also produce, which are more nutritionally beneficial to our children and also allow us, again, to use local products. We have for a long time been very dependent on more imported products, and as you may probably be aware, the way how we do things, we do it through tenders. So we then are dependent on what these persons can provide. In the last tender process, however, we saw where there were more tenders awarded to local producers and local manufacturers. So that has assisted us greatly with as far as our finances are concerned, because we have been able to do more with less while still trying to make changes to the nutrition that these children receive.
Okay, with respect to the increase that you were talking about, the 14 million, this is under 2019-20 that you're speaking about, that is an error. We recognize that in terms of when we were going through the estimates last night, the figure should really be 77,050. So we'll ask the Ministry of Finance to do the correction. In terms of the assisted schools, we're just still trying to find the details for that one, but we'll come back to that one shortly. But I believe that the transfer is for assisted schools, and the amount may have been increased because usually the amount may not have been sufficient over the previous years, so the adjustment may have been made, but we will clarify that.
Ma'am, thank you. I was particularly interested in the breakdown, which are the schools being assisted, and the break. Yeah, that's fine. And the 12 million increase under 271, basic educational development, that's an error as well? The 14 million you said was an error. The 12 is also an error? 271 basic educational development, moving from 149,614, which was approved, to an actual performance of 161.
Which is this program, please? 271, WIC sub-program.
That is subsumed in the 040 amount, you're saying?
No, I asked him WIC sub-program under 271.
Well, I am reading on
What page then?
summary page of the estimates, first figures.
Which page then?
I don't have page numbers on this. No page numbers on. This is the first page of, as you go past the statement on strategic goals, first summary page, where the mission statement is carried. I see a line 271. It's the same page that carries the
summary?
14 to 28. That error is on the same page.
Oh, he mean here, no. He talking about the direction, he talking about the summary. He talking about something else. He said on the 271. No. This is not 271. He particularly said, you are saying after the strategic goals on these, and you're looking at the summary page, where it says direction and policy formulation 14,311 to 28,351. What is the whole thing?
2 lines down.
$149.6 to 161. What I miss all estimates?
You mean that is revised?
He's talking about the revised amount. He's talking about these figures here. But which sub-program? Because the basic educational development has a number of sub-programs. But this is just a summary. Yeah. Okay. All right, we will do that. All right, so we will get back to him.
So programs 271. We got all of these.
Machinery and equipment.
Next page. We got a lot.
Well, Honourable Member, I would want that we could suspend for lunch, and perhaps over lunch we can check to see exactly what area you are referring to and come back with a response.
I see some movement on
Yeah.
property and plant, machinery, equipment, maybe these things explain, but I will live.
That is fine.
So you see that? Next page. He could be in on Boston. That looks so. Jeffrey coming up? Nigel? Hmm? Yeah.
Madam Chair, I
Please,
beg that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask permission to sit again.
It is proposed that I report to the Honourable Speaker progress with Head 87. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:40 p.m.
Until 2:40 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:40 p.m.